The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to the Daily Racing Forum / DRF Bets presented handicapping session for the Belmont Stakes and the associated late pick 4 on Saturday. Before we get started, just want to remind you that DRF Bets is your home for legal online horse racing and wagering. With DRF Bets, you can get free access to past performances, industry-leading journalism, and earn cash back on your wagers. Our brand new redesigned webpage is receiving rave reviews. Simply put, DRF Bets puts you in the best position to win. Registration is free. Just go to bets.drf.com and come join the thousands of sharp horse players that make DRF their home for horse racing. Enter promo code DRF100 and you will receive a $100 deposit match bonus. That's $100 of DRF's money to play on Belmont Stakes weekend. Sign up to bets.drf.com today. I'm your host, Peter Thomas Fornatale, excited to be with you for the next hour, joined by two very special guests today, bringing him back for a third time this Triple Crown season. I'll start off by introducing the best-selling handicapping author of all time. He is also the creator and still head honcho of his own eponymous Speed Figures. He is, of course, Andy Beyer. Andy, how are you tonight?
I am well, getting psyched up for this Belmont.
It should be a ton of fun. We are also joined by a DRF stalwart whose work you know from both the pages of DRF and the fantastic stuff he does also over at the DRF video department. I'm talking about New York handicapper Mike Beer. Mike, what's up?
Not too much, Pete. I'm excited to be here. Obviously, always thrilled and honored to be on the same stage with Mr. Beyer, the great Mr. Beyer, and really looking forward to Saturday.
I feel the same way. And we're going to start off, we're going to dive right in. We're going to go right to the main event. We'll ask a couple of general questions before we get into our specific handicapping opinions of the Grade 1 Belmont Stakes, which will go off as the 11th on Saturday at 6:46 Eastern Time. I'm going to start off with a couple of general questions. This one is getting very general, and it's about the state of this race in general in an era where not a whole lot of attention is paid in American racing to a mile-and-a-half dirt races, with this being the lone exception. And Andy, I'll start with you. Do you think the significance of the Belmont Stakes has dwindled over the years?
Absolutely. I mean, I don't think anybody could dispute that. I mean, there was a time when when American racehorses were really bred for stamina, and the Belmont was regarded as the great test of their stamina, and it was dubbed the test of the champion. But as American breeding has become more and more speed oriented, nobody breeds horses, to go a mile and a half on the dirt anymore. This race has, certainly in the last decade or so, when you look at the winners, there are just, been so many kind of freaky results and, bad long shots winning just because, somebody's got to finish first in a race where nobody can go the distance. So, except in a year when somebody is going for the Triple Crown, it really has lost its luster.
Is that enough, Mike Beer, for you? The fact that every few years we have the opportunity to see a horse test himself against history and try to go these 12 furlongs. Is that enough for you to feel like this race should continue to be exactly what it is, mile and a half on the dirt going forward?
Well, yeah. I mean, I don't. If that question's meant to ask me if I think they should, do something about maybe changing the distance of the race or something like that. I mean, I don't really see any reason to do that. I think they should leave it as it is. I will agree with what Andy said, though, in that, it's just unless somebody's going for the Triple Crown, maybe it's just not that important a race anymore. And I think, just to put, the finest possible on that, I mean, let's just look at the field that's running in the race this year, and not to, take down any of the horses that are actually showing up, but, you only have to go back about 5 weeks to get right before, as we led up to the Kentucky Derby, when all anybody really wanted to talk about was how deep this crop of 3-year-olds were, how talented they were, how good many of them could ultimately be. You had a full field of 20 horses in that race. Justify wins. 2 weeks later at the Preakness, you get Bravazzo, Good Magic, and Lone Sailor joining Justify in the gate of the Preakness. Everybody else, where is everybody else? They don't want to run in the race all of a sudden. And now we're 3 weeks further on in the Belmont, and Justify is here again against a couple of the also rans, a couple horses who got beat 40 lengths by him in the Kentucky Derby. Where are all of these good 3-year-olds? Everybody wants to win the Kentucky Derby, and then when nobody wins it except for one horse, they just all abandon these races. And I think that more than anything else has really, really hurt the status of this race, in particular the Belmont Stakes, because horses just don't show up to run in it anymore. 3-year-olds, I still believe, are good horses. And I think these are still important races, but that's just not the way the game's played anymore. And these guys, the owners and the trainers don't want to run in these races for some reason.
Right. And in a lot of cases, they think, having a horse branded as a 1.5 mile horse is always, it's kind of a strike against him when he goes to stud. And when you look at the post Belmont careers, or the let's say the stud careers of recent winners of the race, I mean, winning the Belmont really doesn't count for much of anything. I mean, unless you've also won other major shorter races. I mean, DeTerra, the winner in 2008, went to stand at stud in Venezuela. I mean, how low can you go?
Do you think, Andy, that there needs to be any sort of action plan taken about this, or is it more just an observation about the way things are?
I don't know what the answer would be. I'm a traditionalist. I mean, I would, the Triple Crown is something that resonates with the public more than, anything else in horse racing. And so to tamper with it and take away the drama and the publicity that the sport gets from a Triple Crown bid like this year, I guess you can't repair it. But as I say, when you've got an ordinary year and somebody like Creator or Drosselmeyer wins this race, and it's a little hard to get excited about the Belmont.
Hey, at least Drosselmeyer won a Breeders' Cup.
Yep.
Conversation of the forum. Let's get to the central question of what I believe is the central question of this year's race. And I'll start, Mike, we're going to pose this one to you because I think it's a bit of a loaded question as far as Andy is concerned. Do you believe that Justify is slowing down, Mike?
That's a good question, actually. I personally, I can see both sides of that argument. I personally am going to answer it in the negative. I don't think he is, but we'll see. I after much consideration and thinking about the Preakness for a while after it was run, and obviously it wasn't, the Preakness wasn't his most compelling performance, that's for sure. But after I thought about it, for a long time, to me, it wasn't that strong of a field. And, as we already discussed, a lot of the top 3-year-olds, for whatever reason, didn't see the need to run in that race. After the Kentucky Derby had been run and he was so impressive in that race, I actually felt like, as good as he is, I didn't feel like he was going to win the Triple Crown. The Preakness to me was just such an easy win for him, even though the figure didn't really stand up. that I don't know if I feel that way anymore. I feel like in the Preakness, he had one horse to beat in there. He knew that he had to beat Good Magic, and he raced that horse. And, Good Magic happens to be a pretty good 3-year-old. He raced him. He put that horse away. I know it was close at the end. I personally, after going through the replay a few times, to me, it never looked like he was going to lose. So I'm not taking that 97 that he earned there and saying this horse is on the side now. I know he's done racing. There's a chance of this stuff just catching up with him, and I'm completely wrong about this, but I don't think he's slowing down.
Andy, how would you answer that same question?
Well, I mean, leaving aside, aside speed figures and just the declining trend of his numbers, I mean, it was clear that was not a good performance. After the way he had dominated his other races and won with authority, he was, justified. He was going to get beat in another 2 or 3 jumps, by Bravazzo and or Tenfold. I can't, and I've looked at this race every way I could to try to, to rational, to try to explain away the unimpressive nature of it, and I really can't. Yes, he was in a duel for the lead, and I know some people have described the Preakness as a tough speed duel, and he prevailed, over a good horse, as Mike said, and then held on versus the closers. But this was not a fast pace by Preakness standards or Pimlico standards. The racetrack, despite all the slop and the fog and everything else, was very fast. One of the fastest tracks for the Preakness in the last decade, and the half-mile fraction was slower than 2017, slower than 2016, slower than 2015, slower than 2014. So that the idea that he weathered a real tough pace, I can't buy that. We can't say that the slop hurt him because he ran so well on it at Churchill Downs. So, I think it is a legitimate, question, and the key question of the Belmont. Does that performance, suggest that he is he's on the downgrade? I mean, when I hear people talking about how Justify is going to blow away the Belmont field, it's like they're acting as if the Preakness didn't exist.
How hard was that figure to bake, Andy? Was there any trickiness to it for Preakness Day?
No, the day was consistent from start to finish. Now Derby Day was tricky because it was raining and the track was changing. I'm confident of our number there, but it was a difficult day. Whereas the Preakness, it was straightforward from start to finish.
So yeah, without that potential wrinkle, it comes a little clearer into view, at least from a speed figure point of view, what the trend is when it comes to Justify's line. But I also understand Mike's point of view of wanting to look at the body of work as well. Let's get right to it. When it comes to wagering in this year's Belmont Stakes, Mike, what is your attitude about Justify? How will you use him, and in what type of spots?
Well, he's obviously going to be a really sharp price in this race. So me, the only real question is, are you with him or are you against him? I'm with him. I just think he's better than these horses. And I would also, and I totally understand, the opposing position to that. And, I think everything that Andy just said about his figure and about his Preakness overall is entirely legitimate, and especially for a horse who's going to be, whatever he is, 3 or 4 to 5 in this race, a valid way to look at him and to think that he's really vulnerable on Saturday. I just don't really look at him that way. I think he's a lot better than these horses. And I also, I keep looking at him and thinking, are we all so sure? I mean, obviously he's fine on a wet track. Are we all so sure that this is a horse who really likes a wet track? His Derby was obviously a very good performance, as was his second career start. But the 2 fastest races this horse has ever run, and the 2 most dominant races he's run, arguably the two races on fast dirt for him. I think there's a real chance that he really appreciates getting to run fast dirt for the first time in a couple of months in this race. And just again, going back to all the other, supposedly anyway, good 3-year-olds are bypassing this race. I think it gives him a huge advantage on this field. I just don't like anybody else in the race, Pete. And I'm not trying to concede the race to him, but I don't like anybody else, and I'm not betting against this horse.
No, I mean, I see where you're coming from. One other point that sort of jives with what you're saying, Mike, about the mud not necessarily being a big move up for him, though he obviously handled it well enough to win 2 classics. The way he's been working out has been, by all standards and by my own eye, absolutely nothing to fault with it. He doesn't. The declining horse I see when I look at the dope is not the horse I see on the track in the workouts. Andy, how do you reconcile those ideas, and what do you think of Justify in this spot on Saturday?
Well, Justify is clearly the one the one greatly talented horse in this field. I mean, he was brilliant in most of his races. I mean, I'm not going to have a major financial stake in this race. I think it'd be kind of crazy to take a huge stand against him. But I mean, as a fan, what I would like to see is for him to really live up to what most of us think he is at his best, and win this race by 10 lengths, and get a speed figure of 110, and establish himself as a really great horse and great Triple Crown winner. But when I look at, I was very dubious of, I was, let's say, skeptical of him going into the Derby because of the curse of Apollo, not because of just the rule that horses, have to have had a race at 2 in order to win the Kentucky Derby, but just because of the basic concept behind it, that a horse needs sufficient bottom, and experience to win the Derby, and trying to cram too much preparation into a short period of time just has historically not worked. Well, he's in the hands of one of the greatest trainers who has ever graced the American racing scene, and he ran great in the Derby. But is it not possible that after putting together now 5 races in a 3-month period, that his form might be turning downward? I think it's quite possible. Maybe just on his superior ability, he could win anyway. But I look at the Preakness, and I just have to think that there's a great likelihood that currently his form cycle is on the downgrade.
What would you see, or who would you see as the likely alternatives, Andy?
I can't love anybody, but Tenfold would be my horse in here. We've all seen Steve Asmussen, over the years do great work. I've never been, he ships horses into all the big races and we see him there. This winter, I followed the races at Oaklawn Park for the whole season. That was my principal focus, and I really gained, kind of great new respect for Asmussen. I mean, he can handle every kind of horse, and they're never pushed too hard, too fast. And the horses develop, and then they hold their form. I mean, you look at Gunrunner, he never ran a triple-digit figure until August of his 3-year-old year, and then he got good, and he stayed good. And so, I think that, the Tenfold could be, the one horse in this field who is really, who was cut out to be a good horse and is on the upgrade. And I could see him, improving significantly over his Preakness. I mean, even though Bravazzo beat him, at the wire at Pimlico, I mean, Bravazzo has had a lot of chances. He kind of is what he is, but I think Tenfold is the one horse in here that I could see taking the upward step.
Can certainly see those 4 ascending Beyer speed figures. Also, obviously, a pedigree that is meant to relish the 1.5 mile distance. Clearly, getting better, suited for the task. I definitely see where you're coming from. Mike, you said you don't really care for any of the others in here. From a wagering point of view, is there any you would look to have come with Justify on Saturday for your verticals?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the obvious answer, or it seems like the most common answer to that question is Hofburg. I get all the stuff around him and all the reasons why he might actually turn out to be pretty good. He just, he didn't do that much for me in this race, but I do respect him. And I do think he'll run a good race on Saturday. We'll see what happens with him. I feel like if I was going to, just go in a totally different direction against Justify, I might just cast my lot with Vino Rosso and just, hope that he could get back to something more like his Wood Memorial. I'll give him a pass for the Derby, just sort of a wide trip on that track. And he just sort of went evenly around there. He didn't do all that much in that race, but it felt to me a little bit like his Wood, was maybe a little bit of a turning point for him. It's, I had a tough time gauging him prior to that race. He didn't do anything that excited me all that much in his first 4 starts. But I liked that effort from him in the Wood. It was a fast pace. He had a good setup in that race, but I liked the run that he put in. I think he'll be fine with the 1.5 miles as far as, any of these horses go. I suppose, he should go as far as any of them. He's got the right pedigree for it. And, Pletcher he has these horses ready to go in this race. And it doesn't matter if they're logical horses or big long shots or anywhere in between. His horses show up in the Belmont Stakes and they run. For the last 10 or 11 years, every one of them has shown up and run their race. I think he's got 3 wins. He's run second 4 times in that span. These horses run. I think Vino Rosso, there's a real chance he could turn on Saturday.
And that pattern in particular you mentioned, Mike, the Derby, not the Preakness, and then come back has worked out particularly well for him. What do you guys think? And we'll start with you on this one, Andy. How do you think the pace is going to shape up in this race? The Timeform US pace projector had Justified on an uncontested lead. My gut tells me that's not going to be the case based on some of the other entries here. How do you see it?
It certainly looks like there's not a huge amount of speed in the field, and one horse who could be the speed who is Noble Indy, but he's clearly not going to because of the Windstar farm ownership. He's not going to duel Justify in the defeat. I mean, I think it's quite, Wayne Lucas has never been a guy shy about having his horses show their speed, and I have a feeling that he is not going to go down passively and let Justify walk on the lead. So I think he'll be close, and I think, and tenfold will be close as well. But at the mile and a half, I mean, let's say if Justify is, is on the downgrade, I don't see pace being the deciding factor. You still have to get the mile and a half, and this, races at this distance are usually not won by a horse just getting a soft lead. I'd like to say one more thing about Hofburg. That I kind of share Mike's skepticism about him. I don't get the enthusiasm for him at all. I mean, how can he be 9-2 in the morning line, with at half the price of roughly half the price of Bravazzo and tenfold. I mean, his Florida Derby was kind of a setup for closers with a giant pace, and Audible, who's not all that great in my book, beat him decisively. I mean, the Derby, he had some traffic, but he didn't really have a huge amount of trouble, and people saw him flying at the end and galloping out after the wire. But I mean, that was after that hot pace and everybody was dead. It was one of those, kind of a phony suck up, late rally after a hot pace. I mean, I have a lot of respect for Belmont, but I just don't see this horse.
What do we make, and Mike, I'll ask this to you as a way to get your take on the pace here. What do we make of the entry of Restoring Hope? I mean, to me, it almost feels like he's in there to provide some sort of close-up target for Justify, as opposed to a horse who's earned his way in on his own merits. What do you think of that idea, and how do you see this pace shaking out?
Yeah, it's funny. When I saw that Restoring Hope was in, ridiculous me, just sort of looking at him as, just maybe an improving 3-year-old that Baffert wanted to run in here. And then after that, I heard people saying that maybe he was in there to provide some pace, which I don't know. I guess maybe that is the case. I don't know. It didn't occur to me that that's why he was in here. And it just seemed odd to me that Baffert would want a target for Justify in a race that just doesn't have that much pace in it. I don't know why he would just want Justify to go
right.
lead.
But, particularly after. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
No, particularly after he drew post position 1, the last thing you want to do is to give away that post position advantage and let some bum get in front of you and stop in your face.
Yeah, it didn't make any sense to me. Maybe that is why he's in here. I don't know, Pete. But to me, if he is in here for that reason, it seems like kind of an ill-advised plan to me.
Yeah, well, it might be out the window based on the post draw. It seems like from the one, the only plan to me that makes sense is the idea of having Justify just get out there and go on with it and attempt to run as efficiently as possible. Now, you drive yourself crazy listening to what owners have to say sometime. But I did think it was interesting in the interview that Mike Rapoli did at the post position draw that he talked about this idea of Noble Indy going to the front. I thought of it the same way that Andy did, that it would be crazy for, given Repoli's business ties with Windstar, to have their own horse potentially out there on the lead. But it's tough to guess. It's suddenly a race that I thought a week ago we were going to look at, and everybody I was going to know, you were going to know, my mom who doesn't bet horses was going to know that Justify was going to be alone on the lead. I think it's at least a little interesting and worthy of attention that there could be some other scenarios. Mike, as the guy who likes Justify, I think the best of our group, do you see him just cruising along on the lead at the end of the day, or do you have another design of this race in mind?
Yeah, no, I really did feel like that Mike Smith was just going to put him on the front in this race, and then you have to take your chance that way and see what happens. And I sort of, when we were talking about the pace before, I did agree with Andy on that I felt like maybe Bravazzo would be the one who would try and show a little speed here and, at least be close. I don't envision, anybody in this race necessarily just going out there and saying, you know what, I'll sacrifice myself and go and make this horse run on the front end. But I do think Bravazzo will be closer. I don't know, Pete. I just didn't see a lot of speed in the race. And, Justify, everything in consideration for him, all of his races that he's run. I mean, he's a fast horse. He has speed. And I know that he doesn't need the lead to run his best race. He has shown that already. But he's the fastest horse early in this race, and they're supposed to be going to the lead with him.
He's got that push button look for sure. It's going to be fascinating to see how it all plays out. If they just run to their pace figures, he will be loose and lonely. But there are enough scenarios. Bravazzo being raced so much and sharp, and Lucas's competitiveness, the Noble Indy idea in the back of the head, whatever's going on with restoring hope. It's a little more interesting than I thought it was going to be a week ago. All right, before we leave this race and loop back to this all graded stakes pick 4, I just want to ask for a specific wagering thought from each of you. And I'll start with you, Andy. Which pool do you feel like the majority of your action will be going into, and how do you see playing it?
Well, I mean, Justify. I mean, the 4 to 5 is a ridiculous come on morning line. I mean, this horse is going to be 1 to 5 or 2 to 5 tops, and I would, if I'm playing a pick 4, it would be to get alive a little bit to tenfold, and and to play on the theory that Justify is on the downgrade. I mean, I just can't see. See any real value in using him, in the top spot in a pick 4 or even in exact is, he's just going to be too short a price. I mean, if you're gonna play this race, I think it has to be to take a small shot and try to beat him.
Mike, as someone who's in the Justify camp, are you just going to put him stone cold on the end in picks, or do you have another idea?
Yeah, I mean, I do want to play the pick 4, but it's sort of an agreement with Andy. He's sort of like my least favorite kind of horse. I mean, these sequences. I know that he could be looked at as the proverbial free square. A lot of people like that kind of thing where you don't have to worry about it. And I like it sometimes too. I just don't like it when, the free square is everybody's free square. And so the whole world will be on this horse. I don't particularly like that all that much. I still want to play the pick 4. I'll still have most of it through him. I am going to use Vino Rosso on some tickets as well. Just, hoping that he can find a way to punch up in this race and maybe pull off some kind of an upset. And if, listen, if Andy's right, and I think he makes a good case for it, if Justify is heading the wrong way at this point, then this race is open to a lot of different horses. So I want to have some tickets against this horse just in case that's what's going on here.
In percentage terms, what are you talking about? Like 50% through Justify, 80%? How would you see it?
Yeah, I would probably say that Justify is, 60 to 70% of my play in the pick 4. And then, just to leave it open for some other horses just in case.
Makes sense. Let's loop back to the start of the pick 4, this all graded stakes pick 4, to the Just a Game. Pretty interesting race. Lots of live looking competitors in here. Andy, we'll start with you. How do you want to get this party started in the first leg?
Well, I'd like to get it started with Lull. I thought that her race at Gulfstream was a real terrific effort. I mean, at least if we can believe the published fractional times, which at Gulfstream is kind of not necessarily a given, but the 45 flat in that race was sensational. I mean, he had another mile race on the card. I mean, it was not a great group, but it was 3-year-old filly stakes horses, and they went in 48.4. So that was a huge pace against, some good speed horses. She held on and beat On Leave, who certainly fits class-wise with this group. So I'm gonna take my chances with Lull.
Mike, how do you see this one?
Yeah, I'm a little afraid of Lull, actually. It's interesting that I had been a very big fan of hers from the get-go, but she's actually pretty good. She's pretty scary in this race too, just because there's not that much other pace in the race. So I think she's pretty dangerous going the mile. But at the end of the day, in this race, I'm sort of, almost all about off limits in this race for Chad. Chad's running a couple in here. His other one, obviously has her merits as well. She was really good winning her stateside debut, and I think she's going to take a lot of money in here. But I like off limits, and I just sort of look at her first 2 starts this year. After she had such an unbelievable year last year for Chad, where she was just winning everything, and she got the big Grade 1 win at the end of the year in California, and she just ran a terrific race that day as well. I really like what she did last year. She's come back for 2 starts. I keep looking at the Hillsborough as soon as they ran it, and I just felt like Chad was prepping her in that race. I don't even feel like I think he was really just giving her a race first time out. He just sat her off the pace in there. Joel Rosario was riding. He had a chance to get her out into the clear and start a run around the second turn of that race, and he didn't even go for it. He just sat in behind the entire way, almost like they were just giving her a race in there. And when she came back in the Jenny Whitey last time, I thought she ran terrific in there. She had a little bit of traffic trouble in the second turn. She got put in really tight in the stretch when her stablemate, Sister Charlie, was pushing off the rail. I think she was second best. I don't think she was beating Sister Charlie, but that's a really good horse. And I think she was second best in that spot. And I think everything's sort of coming together for her on Saturday. I think this is the right race for her. I really feel like the mile distance is her absolute best. I think this is what she really wants to do. So I'm really hoping that Saturday is the day where she jumps forward third off the layoff.
All right. Do either of you have any long shots to potentially throw in a pick 4 here? We'll start with you, Mike.
I didn't really have any of the, longer prices in the race. I mean, I like off limits. I think Andy's on the right track with Wall. I don't think she'll be a long shot, but she should be a fair price in the race. And if I was just going to use anybody else, I would use Proctor's Ledge. But she sort of has that feel of like, last time was a good time to have her at a square price, and this just might be a tougher spot for her.
Andy, any other?
I mean, if I look, I'm not a masochist. I'm certainly not going to take much of a stand, a total stand against Chad Brown on the turf. I mean, he wins everything, and I'm obviously off limits. I have figures well in here. She's got the best speed figure last time. I don't know what to make of a Raving Beauty. Any other trainer, I would say, well, horse had a pretty soft trip sitting on the rail, going past the tired speed. But with Chad, they just keep improving. So he makes me gun shy about taking stands in turf races.
Fair enough. Let's move on to the second leg here, which will be the 9th race, the good old Met Mile. Very live-looking, interesting-looking crew led by Mind Your Biscuits, trying to stretch back out to a distance he's performed well at in the past but hasn't won. Andy, where are you planning on landing in the pick 4 for this year's Met Mile?
Let me just say a word about the Met Mile. As we were talking about the kind of the decline of the Belmont Stakes, and because of the lack of popularity of mile-and-a-half races, I think it is fair to say that the Met Mile is probably among the 3 most important races in America now. I mean, after the Breeders' Cup Classic and the Kentucky Derby. I mean, people people want great milers, And I mean, this race has just, over the years has just produced, great performances. I mean, next to the Breeders' Cup Classic, the average winning speed figure in the Met Mile is greater than any other race in America. So it's an important race. I get more psyched up for this than I do the Belmont in most years. And this year, my horse, well, I guess I'm just in the Steve Asmussen camp on Saturday, but I think B Jersey is going to be very, very tough in here. I mean, he is just improving with every race, and has he caught a field where there, by Met Mile standards, there isn't a huge amount of speed. Now, you're never going to get a slow pace in this race, but I mean, B Jersey has got great early foot and terrific improving form. I mean, that's my horse.
I like it. He does look like he might have a pace advantage in here. Mike, how do you see this one?
Yeah, I agree that he looks pretty dangerous in this race. We'll see, how fast he has to go. Because the one thing that I will say about B Jersey, he's been so impressive in his last few starts. The one thing I will say that concerned me about him a little bit was just that he's really only made one start in this country where he didn't make the lead. And to me, it's the worst race he's run by far. And so I just wonder if he will actually win his race, if he somehow doesn't make the front in this race, and see if he can do it. But I'm afraid of him. I just sort of got this down to, and I'm not way against Mind Your Biscuits, but I don't know, how much I need him as the favorite in this race. I think he's a good horse. I suppose the rail could be fine for him, but drawn to the rail, I don't know. The race, it should set up fine for him. I don't love him, but I'm not way against him. I think that he can win. I like Awesome Slew. He's just one of those horses where he's starting to run out of time as far as I'm concerned. I don't know how he didn't win last time on Derby Day. I guess you could say maybe the wet track, sort of took something away from him there. But I don't know if that's a valid excuse for him. I think that's a race he should have won. But at the other side of that, he keeps showing up in these major races, the major 7 and 8 furlong races around here. He shows up in all of them. He runs well in all of them. He hasn't always been that lucky as far as, pace and trip goes, but when he gets the right setup, he shows up and he runs. I'm going to use that horse. I'm a little interested in McCracken. He's a little slow right now, but he's second off the layoff, second as a 4-year-old. I think he's a one-turn horse. I'm using him at a price. And I'm going to throw in one-liner for Pletcher. I don't know how good this horse is, but I also don't think he wants to go long. And I thought he ran well in the special last time for about a mile and a 16th. And then I think he sort of had enough of that. He was chasing the horse that was on the lead, Irish War Cry, and he just got tired in the stretch. But I think this horse might be more of a one-turn kind of horse. Andy already talked about how, by Met Mile standards, there's not a ton of pace in this race. This horse has speed. I think he'll be forward. I think he has some ability, and he's still relatively lightly raced. He's going to be a price for Pletcher. I'll throw him in the pick 4 for sure.
All right, let's move on to the third leg of our pick 4. The traditional race before the Belmont is the Manhattan. Pretty salty group shows up in here as well. Mike, we'll keep it with you.
Yeah, this is one of those, really, really strong races on the card. They got a good field for this one. And more than anything else, what they got is a 10 furlong turf race that actually has some speed in it. I mean, there are plenty of horses who want to be forward, and who, it feels like even if they don't go, dueling on the front end, they're going to go a legitimate pace, and they're going to be racing in this race from, I think, a relatively long way out. There are a lot of horses who want to be up there in the mix in this race. And I think that sort of works against Beach Patrol. I guess I'm happy to call Beach Patrol the horse to beat in this race. He's fine. If he runs his best race, he's going to be tough to beat in here, but he wants to, be up close all the way. And there's a lot of other speed in here. And I think he's going to have to really earn. And, I know it was his first off the layoff last time, but I wasn't particularly thrilled with his run in the Turf Classic last time. I mean, he just, I know Yoshida's good too, but he just never looked like he was going to win that race to me. I guess if nothing, I'm not a masochist. I'm going back to Sadler's Joy, Pete. I think he's run fine in all of his races this year, and he's just one of those horses who I think the races in his last 2 starts haven't set up that great for him. The speeds in both of those races were high happy and one go all go, and they basically went 1-2 around the track in those races until Sadler's Joy got up for second last time. I think things are going to be different this time. I think they're going to be really racing in front of him, and it's going to set up well for his horse. And he just runs every single time. I think he wants to go a little farther than this, but 10 furlongs with a big pace in front of him, I think that works for him. He's a very fair price on the morning line. If that's the price he's going off at, I want to have a big piece of this horse because I think he's going to run well.
I hear the logic. I mean, he's got that great late kick, typically much shorter price than he projects to be on Saturday, and maybe a bit more speed with the ones who've been setting the pace in his last couple of races, plus a couple of wild cards who might have a little bit of pace. Andy, how do you see this year's Manhattan?
Well, I after listening to Mike, I'm certainly going to have Sadler's Joy on my ticket. I think that's. I find that reasoning very persuasive. I mean, this horse has, obviously got, plenty of figures good enough to win here. And, when you look at that, halves and 49 and 115 for fractions. I mean, this, I hadn't been smart enough to zero in on the fact that this is one of these rare turf races where we're going to have a pace. I mean, even having said that, I mean, I certainly have to. I have to respect Beach Patrol here. He ran a couple great races at the end of last season. And if you look at he has never won a race at 1 mile and 1/8 or shorter. He's run some okay races in it, but he's still 0 for 7 at that distance. So, he wants to go farther. And, plus he had no, previous, soft turf form. So I think that loss at Churchill can kind of be forgiven. He's the horse to beat, but Mike's talked me into Sadler's Joy.
I think you guys have narrowed down to the right, too. It looks at first glance like there's a lot of chances. A horse like High Happy certainly done nothing wrong in the last 2 starts. But the 2 you mentioned, I definitely am very the most attracted by. And it could be a chance to narrow down a bit in a race where a lot of people will be spreading. We've had a lot of questions come in from the audience. We'll spend the next few minutes looking at those. One of the big questions we've had concerns Bolt Doro in the Met Mile. I want to get both of your takes on him. Andy, we'll start with you.
I'm disappointed to see him here. I know a lot of the people in California had been knockers of Mick Ruiz, and I guess I guess I am now too. I mean, why do you? I like this horse in the Derby. I've liked him his whole career. I mean, why do you go hunting for a spot like this against older horses in June, when there are just would be so many opportunities to get this horse, back on the right track against 3-year-olds. I mean, this just doesn't make sense. And, to go against, seasoned champions like, Mind Your Biscuits. I mean, he's not going to win this, I don't think, and I just don't think he should be in this field.
Mike, any more optimism from you as it pertains to Bolt Doro?
Yeah, I don't know, maybe a little more. I don't know. I still feel like it's a tough spot for him. Just to go back to Andy's point too. I mean, it feels like after the Derby, Mick Ruiz, I think he might have mentioned every race in the country for this horse. For this horse's next start. He talked about the Woody Stevens. He talked about the Penn Mile, maybe the Preakness. He shows up in the Met Mile. I don't know. It doesn't feel like they really had a big plan with this horse. It just sort of feels like they just kind of landed here, and I don't know how confident you can be when that's how things are going for him. I think he's an okay horse, but I'm willing to put a line through the Derby for him. I understand what their plan was. I think in the Kentucky Derby, they had to get back at Justify, and they just tried to go after him right from the start of that race. It didn't work out. Obviously, it blew up in their face, but I sort of get what they were thinking. I don't mind him cutting back. I've never been a huge Bull Doro guy. I've never been a big fan of his, but maybe this is the kind of race where he can, turn around and run well. I think it's going to be a very difficult race for him to win, though.
Yeah, I mean, you've mentioned the Woody Stevens. What's wrong with that? I mean, he would have.
That was one of the more logical.
He would have been less than 2-1, for a $400,000 purse. What's wrong with that?
We had a couple more questions about Justify. I guess there's been some commentary in some corners of media, or at least social media, about the one pole possibly being an issue for Justify. Mike Beer, do you see that draw as anything that might be a problem for the big horse in the big one?
No, I don't know. I never do, though. To me, when you're talking about 2-turn route races on the dirt, you can't do better than drawing the one hole. I think it's a great post, especially for a horse like him who has speed. I guess maybe people have, they can't shake the memories of Big Brown, break it from the rail, and totally blowing things. Is that maybe that's fucking people's heads? I don't know. I think it's a perfect post position for him.
I tend to agree. I mean, it's different in the Derby where you have the field of 20 and the cavalry charge and the chance for so many things to go wrong. But for me, and Andy, let me know if you agree, other than the Derby, it's the ideal draw for a horse with speed going 2 turns in the dirt.
Right. I mean, the Belmont, of course, is a race that has historically given rise, to horrible jockey performances. So I think trainers should just probably be more nervous about, how jockeys ride at 1.5 miles, rather than the post. I mean, conceivably it could be a negative, but there are a lot of other ways to screw up the Belmont.
We got a question for you, Andy, about your pick 4 play. Will you be singling tenfold in a small pick 4, or do you have a different vision?
I don't know, but as I say, playing a ticket with with Justify on it, I just can't see. I just can't see any value. So I don't have a good plan. I'm not going to commit too much money to try to beating Justify, but I'll probably play a small pick 4 with just in the chance that tenfold wins that I could make a score.
We have a conspiracy theory question. I always like these. Mike, I'll throw this one to you. You think there's anything to the idea that the track could be, souped up and or made to be speed favoring on Saturday to aid Justify in his bid to become the 13th Triple Crown winner? Do you give any credence to the idea the tracks get souped up on big days?
Well, does that happen, or has that happened in the past? Maybe. I mean, maybe there's a chance that these guys want the track to be as fast as it can be. Are they doing that to enhance the chances of one horse in the race? I mean, I don't see how that's a real theory. I don't see what difference it makes to anybody as far on that side of things, the track maintenance side of things, that Justify wins. I don't know why they would be invested in that. Will they make the track as fast as they can make it? I don't know. I think that probably has happened before. I doubt that's happening on Saturday, but they're certainly not doing it to help Justify.
Right. They've already got the 90,000 people paying their admission, right, buying their concessions. I don't think they need to fix anything, on Saturday afternoon.
Time for a couple more questions from the audience before we let you guys get on with your evening. This one I'll ask Andy. One of our listeners makes it a habit to eliminate horses sent out by trainers whose win percentage is under 10%. Do you think that's an expected value play in the long run to eliminate 10% or less winning percentage trainers' horses?
They're just a lot of trainers who just you know, who may be reasonably competent and don't have the stock and don't have a high win percentage. I mean, I wouldn't be that dogmatic. That obviously we obviously we all pay attention to trainers, but to draw a hard and fast line like that, I think would not be good. I mean, you look at you look at the aforementioned Bolt Doro. I mean, Mick Ruiz has a terrible a terrible win percentage, but it certainly didn't stop this horse from from running a lot of good races and giving a good account of himself. So I like I say, we want competent trainers, but I wouldn't be that hard and fast with a rule.
I venture to say that very often that's going to be priced into the market, so you're going to get enough extra in your price on those low percentage trainers that it probably counterbalances the negative effect that they have. But hey, different strokes for different folks. Mike, one more for you. This one came in about the Acorn. One of our listeners wanting to know if you had any strong opinion about that Grade 1, which goes as race 4 on the Belmont Stakes undercard.
Well, in the Acorn, yeah, I mean, you probably have the heaviest favorite of the weekends in that race with Monomoy Girl. So, I don't know if that's, the kind of race where you want to get too heavily involved. I don't think that she necessarily has to win. I think she probably will win. I really like the turn back for her. I like her going shorter distances. But, she's just too fast for these horses right now. But that was a pretty hard race on her, that Kentucky Oak. She worked really, really hard in that race. So it'll be interesting to see if she reacts to it at all. And, I think she's facing a good horse in Caledonia Road. So I don't think it's impossible that Caledonia Road beats her. Caledonia Road was prepping off the layoff last time against a weak field. So obviously she has to come forward off of that race. But she's pretty talented, and she's a strong finisher in her races. So I don't think it's a walkover, but I think Monomoy Girl's a very likely winner in that race.
All right, Andy, last question for you. This one comes from Perrin, unusual name, in Brooklyn, who recently saw the Secretariat movie and wanted to know if it's true that Secretariat once tried to pee on your leg.
No, it was. I had to laugh about that, but that was I never get that close to horses anyway, so it would have been implausible. I usually keep a safe distance.
I'll relay that message to the upstairs bedroom from which that question. She's probably asleep now, and we'll tell her tomorrow. Gentlemen, I want to thank you both so much for your time. Always a pleasure talking racing to you, especially ahead of a historic occasion like this Saturday's Belmont Stakes. So thank you very much, Andy Beyer. Thank you very much, Mike Beer. Thank you very much to our sponsors, DRF Bets. You can learn more about all the promotions going on over there, bets.drf.com. That's all the time we have. Thanks most of all to all of you for joining us for the course of the last hour. We will be back soon with more DRF programming. You've been watching content produced by DRF.com.